to make a note on.
Okay, welcome to the daily market wrap. This is the biggest charts in 30 minutes, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Let's take a look. Let's begin with Bitcoin. So, Bitcoin has, I think, another several months left on the downside here. And, it would not surprise me to see Bitcoin just repeat the same pattern that it put in last cycle during the bear market, where Bitcoin gets down below. If we go ahead and zoom out here, we're on a daily. Let's zoom out to a weekly. And from a weekly, we'll be able to see the important moving average, the 200-week moving average. So last cycle, Bitcoin broke below the 200-week moving average and carved out a trough. And that period, it was from June 2022 to, I'm going to say, April of 2023. So that was the trough for last bear cycle. And, the move down below the 200-week moving average here, it was at its trough there. I think it was all the way down 30% extended to the downside from its 200-week. So we can just measure that. Yeah. So it was 33% to the downside. So below the 200-week. And so if we get something similar this cycle, I don't think that it would be as extended to the downside because we didn't get that full euphoria extension to the upside this cycle. So let's just say, maybe we get some extension to the downside, but not 30%. Maybe we get 15% this time. That's going to bring Bitcoin all the way down to like 50K. So, my target for Bitcoin this bear cycle, I feel pretty confident in saying that this cycle is not going to be any different than last cycle, which means that we see Bitcoin down at 50K at some point this year. That's what I think happens. So what does that mean for the rest of the digital asset space? Well, I think what it means is this breakdown in ETH is just getting started. I think that's what this means. So take a look at what happened last cycle. We got this big move after that $2,100 level broke. And that $2,100 level was horizontal support last cycle too, just like it was this cycle. And notice there's the horizontal support and there's the breakdown at the same dollar level too. So if we just go ahead and draw this in, ETH could definitely double bottom at $900, maybe put in a slightly higher low. That certainly makes a lot of sense to me. So just looking at the pattern, that seems to be what is shaking up for ETH. Now, if we go ahead and move on over to Solana, here's Solana. And, it's just an air pocket down below Sol now, all the way down to like $30, something like that down here. So I think Solana is one of the, it's one of my highest conviction shorts. I just need to, make sure to stay in it to give myself the duration to let this move play out. That's really what I'm, focused on now is time and managing my mind so that I don't get shaken out prematurely. I think this has a lot more room to go on the downside. This is a really ugly head and shoulders pattern out of Solana. So if we bring that brush there, so that is a pretty ugly head and shoulders. And if I draw the headline and, right here is the neckline or so, the pattern completion is all the way down here at 30 or so. So yeah, to me, that is a very bearish price action pattern coupled with this horizontal breakdown and trading well below the 200-week moving average. So yeah, it looks as though we're just going to see this repeat. And if we grab that arrow, then, last cycle, when that same level, $95 broke, Solana moved straight down to $33 in a hurry. So I think that's probably what happens here too. Same exact thing, just repeats. That's kind of strange. Yeah, same for all three. Bitcoin likely just puts in the same pattern. Ethereum, I think, likely puts in the same pattern. And Solana likely just puts in the same pattern. So it might just be another couple of weeks on the downside, and then we chop around and find a trough. So let's take a look at some of the other alts because they look even worse. So here's Tau, and Tau has just, there isn't really another cycle that we can compare it to. It doesn't really have enough data here. So, this could go, I think it goes down to the lows from, when it was started, or at least when this data set starts. I think it probably goes down to $35 or so, something like that. Makes sense on Tau. And that's just, basically straight down from here as the majors go down. So Bitcoin, ETH, and Sol moving to the downside. And, here's BitTensor Tau. So I think this makes a beeline for 35 bucks. Sui just, continues to push lower here. And Sui is also one of my highest conviction shorts. And so if we go ahead and just draw this in like so, from 95 cents to 36 cents on Sui. So I think it probably heads down there over the next couple of weeks. Let's see, Doge, another meme coin. Doge, a well-known meme coin, but I think Doge goes at least to 5 cents, and that would only be 50%, 50% more on the downside out of Doge. So, maybe there's more downside left for Doge, but last cycle, what did it do last cycle? So in 2022, this level seemed to have been an interesting support, and then it failed and moved down to the bottom right here where I've got support. So I think it does the exact same thing. So right here, let me go ahead and just draw this in. That move there is this move here. So it just looks like the pattern repeats. Here's ARB, and this is a newer token, so we don't have any more data for ARB, but this is actually a bullish pattern, I think. So maybe if ARB gets down to 2 cents, I move down to 2 cents, I might buy some. Here's Link. Let's see what Link did last cycle. So last cycle, when Link broke down below 976, it basically got very close to its ultimate trough support level at $4.60 or so. And, it looks as though we're going to see that same pattern repeat just one more time right here with Link. I bet Link just heads down to 455, something like that. So that's, what is that? Another 50% on the downside for Link. How about XMR? Here's XMR. Now, this has been a little bit of a wild card. I exited my short earlier today on this one, and I did not re-enter it. But, I was thinking that it would get all the way up to the 200-day moving average, and it got up there. It got up there today. So this is probably a better entry than my initial entry, which was, somewhere around here, I think, because I wasn't really trading XMR. But now that it's up here at the 200-day, that's actually an interesting short entry position, because I think that XMR, along with everything else, will get sold if Bitcoin, continues moving down toward its 200-day moving average, which I think is likely. Let's take a look at XRP. So XRP is, this is just pure meme. That parabola there, and then, this is just a geometric straight up, and just giving it all back now. So it's just a matter of time, I think, until XRP gets down into the maybe 46 cents. That could be an interesting level for XRP down there at 45, 46 cents or so, but it could definitely go lower. What did it do last cycle? So last cycle in June, so March, here's April, May, June. There's the real breakdown. So last cycle, XRP got all the way down to 28 cents. So, could it touch 28 cents? Absolutely. Absolutely it could. And here, that would be, that makes XRP one of the best shorts on the table right now on the board. So, this is definitely one of the best on the board. Look at that move all the way down to support from last cycle. So support last cycle was down here at 28 cents. And this cycle, if XRP tests support again, that would be, 80% on the downside. Wow. That actually looks like a really interesting short play. And, kind of a similar choppy-ish pattern too that it put in last cycle with that big pump and the secondary. This is kind of sort of, but I think that the dump here brings us back down to 28 cents. Now, what if it actually takes us lower? What are the low lows here? The low lows for XRP are all the way down back in March of 2020. So March of 2020 at 9 cents. Now, I don't know if it could get down there. I think it could. But let's say that it were to get down there, 91%. So maybe what you do is you stay short XRP, but you start lightening up. Here might be a little bit of support, 75 cents. Maybe that's a little bit too early. Here, at like 38 cents. And then, maybe another one down at the lows, and maybe you just lighten up a little bit there. But these would be the latter out points on the way down. But this looks really good as a short opportunity, I think. Short XRP down to 10 cents. Why not? 90% on the downside from here. Absolutely. Could definitely see that happening. Here's SPX. So I think this probably just goes to zero. But it's difficult to be short a meme coin like this one, because if there is any type of pump out of Bitcoin, then that thing would probably put in a 30% day, or at least it could. And so staying short something like that can be kind of difficult sometimes. But yeah, looks like a lower low, just a lower low, probably in a series of further lower lows for SPX. Here's AVAX. So AVAX, it's already gotten down to that and broken down below that $8.77 level. But I think it's probably going to head down to its March 2020 lows at $2.88. So that makes AVAX, potentially a very interesting short candidate even here. So, another 66% on the downside potentially for AVAX if you can hold short. Not bad. How about Aave? This is one of my favorite protocols, a very useful protocol, and probably not going anywhere. So, but the token, that's from the current price down to the bear market lows from last cycle, which were put in, I think, in June at $50 or so, $47. From the current price, that's still 60%, 58% on the downside. So as long as you're able to hold a short position like that, I think that this could work out pretty well, especially since Aave has broken that level of support. That was long-term trend line support, and it broke. And then the retest failed. So if we just zoom in a little bit, we can see that retest. And the retest is getting rejected. So the breakdown, the retest, the rejection. This is like textbook. This would be if you're not already short Aave, this is a textbook entry on a short. Let's take a look at Tron, TRX. So I think this is Justin Sun's network, but it's broken. Let's see. So I usually don't take a look at this one. It's broken its 200-day moving average. So nothing good ever happens below the 200-day moving average. And if we just take a look back to, 2022, last cycle, it didn't really have the same type of euphoria on the upside and didn't have the same type of dump on the downside either. But, it's rallied quite a bit. I think this thing is yield bearing in some way, that he's able to funnel the stable coin yield into this. I don't know enough about it, so I'm not going to trade it. Let's move on to BNB. BNB. So, this, if it breaks down or when it breaks down, BNB actually, I think, so here's the false breakout. BNB could move all the way down to $400 or maybe even lower. The lows from last bear market were like $185. I could definitely see BNB down there again. Maybe 200. Maybe 200 is a little bit better, more clean number. But BNB at 200, that is a move of 65 or more percent. So, I actually like that as a short quite a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and move this one up towards the top of the list here. And then AVAX also, and Aave also, like those. Okay, and I'm going to just put Doge. I'll leave Doge where it is. Let's take a look at Hype, because Hype had a big pump, and it has been struggling to hold on. So this is the trend line, what was resistance, but when it broke, it became support. And take a look at all those wicks. You see all those wicks down there? That tells me buying pressure. But then up above, we had that 200-day moving average, which acted as resistance and some wicks again. And now Hype backing off down to support. So here's the thing. If Bitcoin can't rally because it's a bear market, don't you know? Well, then I don't think Hype will be able to hold a rally either. But Hype is an interesting protocol, Hyperliquid. And the way that they are able to, in some way, distribute yield to holders of Hype, either in the form of buybacks, or I think there's some type of staking program there. There must be. There's a ton of protocol revenue that Hyperliquid generates, and that protocol revenue makes its way back to token holders. So that makes this an interesting play. But if it fails, if this support fails, then it heads back down to at least $20, but maybe even back down to the lows at $9.30. So it wouldn't surprise me to see Hype move down here. And maybe this is an interesting short too, but I would have a hard time getting short this one. But 70%, it could move on the downside, I think. Now here are Uni and Pendle. Uni, Pendle, maybe Jupe. Let me see if I can grab Jupe. I think I've got that on my watch list at some point down here, and just move that up a little ways so we can take a look at these together, because they're all kind of similar, these protocol tokens. So Uni, with its Uni token, although the Uniswap protocol is very useful, this token, maybe not so much. And so $1.82 that's the support. That's the move all the way back in 2020. So this that level of support is from the current price here. That's another 40%. So Uni's been really weak. Uni's already put in most of its move if it's going to go back down to support. So I wouldn't necessarily open a short on this one. I have a higher level of confidence and conviction in a short, even from these levels on XRP. Now here's Pendle. And Pendle, interesting token. I remember its base from back in the beginning and middle of 2023 into the end of 2023, really big base there. But this is a great protocol, extremely useful. However, it's just kind of hanging out. There's air underneath this, so I think it's likely that it goes back down and tests those those before the bull started lows in 2023. And that would be another 50 or 60% on the downside. So plenty of room on the downside for Pendle still. Jupe, JUP, I'm not quite sure what this does, why this token exists, but it's putting in this is the protocol token. I think it's the governance token for Jupiter, but this is actually, let's see if we can draw in this wedge here. This could be an interesting long play. If things work out the way I see them, but maybe not. Let's see. So maybe if Jupe gets down to its lows, well, yeah, see, that would be all the way down there. That's not feasible. So yeah, maybe it doesn't have much more left, but that's definitely some type of a wedge. I definitely see some type of wedge there. And it could be about to break out of the wedge, but just to the downside, break down out of the wedge to the downside. And it looks like maybe the flash crash lows, that could be support for Jupe. And so that would be, the flash crash, it's trading for 15 cents. The flash crash on October 10th, that would bring it down another 50% or so, about in line with, what we've seen for just about every other alt. Here's JLP. And JLP has a component which is basically like it's like stables, I think. So I don't know that I would really want to trade this ENA. So, a big venture capital interest in this one, I believe. And when it broke down below that level of support there, that double bottom, you see that double bottom there? Let me go ahead and mark this. So right there in ENA. So double bottom, and then the bottom fell out. So, now where's support? Well, maybe 90% lower, but I wouldn't touch this one. Too much manipulation. I don't want to have any piece of that. Here's EtherFi. Now, EtherFi is an extremely useful protocol, but I think it probably revisits its flash crash lows down there at 8 cents. And so let's just see, that move, that's an 80% move. That wouldn't surprise me. That's actually one of the best options in my watch list here. I'm going to move this one all the way up. This deserves a spot next to like XRP in terms of like, the amount of move that's still left on the bone there, potentially. But I really like EtherFi as a protocol, though. It's a great protocol. It really is. But unfortunately, the token, maybe not so great. All right, let's take a look. Here's Eigen, EigenLayer, the token for the liquid restaking protocol, EigenLayer. Now, not sure exactly what this Eigen token does. Weren't they just minting this thing and sending it out to anyone in order to like incentivize people to restake? I think that could have been part of its use case, but this is really, really ugly, and it's already at 20 cents. So, how are we going to figure out where this could go? 20 cents, maybe it goes down to a penny, maybe it goes down to a penny, something like that. So Eigen, if I can trade this thing, that might actually be an interesting opportunity. I'm going to move it up a little bit. Okay, let's take a look at Super. So this is basically like an index of GameFi plays. And GameFi never had a resurgence this cycle. So, GameFi last cycle was super, super hot at the end of the cycle. And there were a bunch of 1000X tokens, really big gains on the GameFi stuff that never really happened this cycle. And so, Super, where could it revisit? Because I think this token probably survives for another cycle. Where could it go? Well, there are the lows from the last bear at 7 cents. So, maybe another 50% on the downside or so, but too uncertain. So I'm not going to touch Super. How about Aether? So this one, this protocol is like GPU compute or rentals or mining in some way. Like I think renting GPU compute. And so now that it's putting in just fresh all-time low after fresh all-time low at 0.005, I'm going to just leave this one be. Here's Mantle, MNT. And, Mantle, this is actually an interesting pattern, but let's take a look at this. So we've got support right there. And this zone has served as support a couple of times now. Doesn't this pattern kind of remind you of Tau a little bit with the triple bottom there? Similar. But if we get down, if Mantle gets down below 47 cents, then it could go all the way to 30 cents. So that 30-cent move, that would be the bigger move there. So, if I would just go ahead and measure this real quick, it's a 50% move. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and pass on Mantle. But Arrow, oh man, this one looks great. So notice that look at that triple bottom. 1 and 2 and 3. And so a break of 30 cents on Arrow. And man, this thing could go easily another 50% to the downside. The first level of support would come in like right there. But I don't think that there really should be support for Arrow since it's basically a reward token. So I think that even with their attempts to make it less inflationary, it is still quite inflationary. So, a break of this, and that looks great, actually. I'm going to go ahead and move this one up my list. Arrow, a short on Arrow looks interesting. Here's Fartcoin. Now, I really used to like Fartcoin, back in 2024. And, basically like the middle of 2025, I really liked Fartcoin. but right now, not so much. So we've got, a level that seems to be just getting broken now on Fartcoin. Let me just go ahead and mark this right about right there. That looks like some decent support. And Fartcoin's just basically sitting at that level of support. But should that fail, I think it goes back down to these lows down here at 2 cents. So, that is a pretty big move out of Fartcoin, 80 cents maybe. I'm going to move this one up. And that's going to get that looks like a better setup. So this is just the watch list that I want to, trade many of these that I don't already have positions open in. Okay, let's take a look at something like, how about Radium? This is Radium's token, the Radium DEX. And it looks like support is a little bit further down, maybe at 9 cents there. Let's move it up right there, 12 cents. Okay, and now I'm going to go ahead and zoom in so we can see this a little bit more clearly. There it is. And let's measure this down to that level of support. So 77%, yeah, and that makes sense because it's just hanging out. There's no support until we get down there. So I like Ray. Ray is an interesting short. I'm going to move that one up, but not one of my favorites though. Okay, let's take a look at IOs maybe. Here's IOs. And this thing during the last bear did nothing but just bleed from where it's currently trading at 7 cents all the way down to, what was the trough? A penny? So another 70% on the downside. Sure. I'm going to leave this one be though. TON. TON, this is the open network built into Telegram. And I don't know why I've got this horizontal here. I think maybe I can put it here. So that looks like a better level of support for TON. And, a breakdown all the way down to 57 cents. That could definitely make sense. Let's see here. 50%. Yeah, you know what? I think there are better opportunities on the board. I'm going to pass on TON. Here's Ondo. Yeah, I don't even want to trade this. I think that it's already put in most of the move. And if it does continue moving lower, it would have to go down to a penny, but I don't think that it, maybe. If Ondo goes to a penny, what type of move are we talking about there? 80%? No way. I mean, it definitely could. This is one of the weaker alts because it's already at or about to break down below its flash crash lows. Yeah, it already did break below its flash crash lows. So that means that once it gets down at here, there's no support down there. So could this one continue to run to the downside? Sure. I'm going to move this up my list here. I'm going to move that around to Fartcoin level. Okay, Kaspa. I was so excited for Kaspa this cycle. I wanted to see smart contracts on Kaspa. I think that I heard that they were working on a wallet, but nothing ever really happened. And it just kind of fizzled and died. It does have this going for it, a little bit of a wedge pattern, but it could fall out of bed and fall out of the bottom of that wedge. So let's go ahead and get a horizontal. Looks like maybe about right there, 1.1 cents. And it's trading for 3 cents. So, I'm going to stay clear of Kaspa. I hope that this one works out. Here's Akash, AKT. And, it looks as though it's already put in most of its bear market move, but this one has not been through a full cycle yet. So could it see another 50% on the downside? Sure could. I'm not really, all that enamored with this pattern though. And Aptos has basically just, collapsed. So this is like the sister chain to Sui. And I think I'm just going to leave this one be. Here's Arweave. And it just keeps plumbing the lows here, making fresh lows on Arweave. Here's Atom. Atom probably goes to 0 or next to it. Maybe 5 cents for Atom. Looks like we've run out of time, you guys. I appreciate everyone for joining live. Please, if you get any value from any of these technical analysis sessions, feel free to share it with your friends, share it with everyone, anywhere. and take a look at the school community. A lot of great free education over there. Thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.